Yes, thank you very much, Ilaria, and for the introduction, and also for both of you already very good presentations, Ilaria and Christoph. Sets the scene perfectly. What I would like to do is to give the regulatory perspective. So as Ilaria said, I'm working for E-Control, the Austrian regulator, energy regulator, and so of course focusing on the regulation of gas and electricity in Austria, but also involved in the European discussions. So, and in that, I would like, as a starting point, to show that regulators on a European level, we have been, we have really tried to have a proactive attitude towards this, because we know that, of course, regulation is or should be enabling things and should not preventing developments. So, back in 2017, and then we published the first study on the future role of gas in 2018. And we looked at a broad range of topics. So not only the core regulatory topics like network tariffs, investment planning and approvals and so on, but also more on the commodity side, guarantees of origin and so on. But this was, I think, a very comprehensive study, and based on this, last year, or this year actually in spring, we had a public consultation where we focused mainly on the key regulatory topics now. So, and in addition, also now the agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators has launched a public consultation, and what I would like to do is just to briefly share with you our main conclusions, takeaways, what we sort of have consulted and what we sort of received as a feedback on those topics. And I would like to focus on 3 topics. Some of them are, of course, overlapping, what Christoph mentioned from the 5 areas, but I would like to focus on 3. The first one would be the tariff topics, but also levies and duties or taxes. Second one would be infrastructure planning, governance of this, more in an integrated way. And the third one, is sort of the regulatory framework which fosters also innovation, pilot projects, but also, of course, the unbundling questions there. So, just why did we all do this? Because as regulators, also regulating both gas and electricity, we see great opportunities through sector coupling. So, of course, was mentioned very well by Christoph, it has great potential of also cross-sector CO2 reduction, the integration of renewable electricity, the storage topic, but also the efficient use of existing infrastructure. So making use of existing gas infrastructure, and by that also having security of supply, namely having not only to rely on one infrastructure, maybe strongly focused on electricity, but also having a gas infrastructures there still. Okay, now the first topic on network tariffs, taxes and levies. It's of course, if I start with the taxes and levies, so what we also saw in our analysis that these are currently providing some market distortions between the sectors, and this should be reviewed, we think, and ideally those taxes and levies should sort of have this overall economically efficient system perspective, and if possible also internalize the environmental costs for CO2 emissions. On the other hand, what we say for network tariffs, there we think the best way to provide a level playing field and to avoid distortions is to have cost-reflective tariffs. So we would not want to see tariffs as a means to subsidize technologies, to sort of specifically pinpoint certain users who should profit from artificially reduced tariffs. So we think tariffs as a general rule should be cost reflective. But still, I think there are some cases where tariffs may need to be reviewed, especially to ensure equal treatment where this is maybe not the case yet between installations which provide similar services. So in some countries we have special treatment on the electricity side for pumped storage power plants, and if power to gas facilities provide the same sort of services, they should sort of also profit from the same tariff regime as the other technologies. What I didn't put out here, but it's of course also the other way around, so powered gas to power. Here we, I think in the past, have always also said that the tariff regime should be maybe more dynamic in a way that tariffs should probably not be set on the peak consumption in a month, but maybe more on a shorter term, maybe peak on a daily basis, so that these gas-fired power plants can actually sort of be operated in a more short-term manner, and so that tariffs, if they are paid on a monthly basis with the peak of a month, that this is not prohibiting any shorter-term usage of gas-fired power plants. Now coming to infrastructure planning, here I think what we as regulators would also emphasize is that, of course, any new investments in gas infrastructure should really be future-proof. That means, of course, we want to see very good cost-benefit analysis, that there is really a case for this, but also these infrastructures should already be useful in a low-carbon or for low-carbon and green gases. So as far as also technically possible, they should be able to already cope with those new gases, which should come in the future. And what we also say is, of course, before any decommissioning or to go down the route of decommissioning, we want to reuse the existing assets as far as possible. I talked to a colleague from GTS, the Dutch TSO, yesterday, and of course there, very interesting case, the L-gas network, which is sort of used less and less and probably will be not used, that it could be converted to hydrogen in the future. So this is a very good example, I think. And now the governance for infrastructure planning. Here, I think it's also important to have a framework which ensures a level playing field for all the new solutions out there. So, of course, with a view to sector coupling, the whole system approach. But that means that also the scenario building should, in our view, be maybe delegated to a more independent body, which sort of sees, well, bottom up from these national energy and climate plans, sort of what are the, sort of from the national levels, the plans, and maybe also looking beyond purely network-related actions. So this is, I think, one aspect we want to promote. Yeah, and what we think also, I think infrastructure planning should, in the past it has always been about adding new infrastructure. In the future we should also maybe integrate more issues of stranded assets into the planning. And it was already said, I think in the future also, I think DSOs should play a much stronger role and should be sort of integrated in the whole planning process. Okay, and last but not least, how do we now see maybe the regulatory framework to be designed to also foster new activities and energy transition projects? So we call this as a dynamic regulation. But what's key, what we found out in many instances, is that regulators would like to allow for exemptions for certain projects, for smaller scale projects, to develop new approaches, but strictly following the regulation that we have, the laws at European level, but also national level, there is no room really for flexibility. So what we would like to have also at the European level is an enabling clause which says, yes, there can be such exceptions or exemptions for pilot and small scale projects. So that would help us very much also at the national levels to be more flexible and to allow for such developments. And but generally we have to say that we do not see the TSOs and the DSOs to be the first ones to sort of go to do competitive activities. If this should be the case, then only as a last resort, after the market has not sort of been ready to pick those developments up. And under strict rules, we would think of if a TSO would do such power-to-gas facilities as a last resort, then it should be also within a separated entity, so legally unbundled. so that we can clearly separate costs and revenues for these activities. Yeah, and regarding the regulation of new networks, we would say that, I mean, it's quite still far away, but as I mentioned in the Netherlands, I mean, these discussions are quite advanced. So, but we say that large scale, if we really talk about large scale hydrogen networks, we would expect them to be also providing regulated third-party access in the future. And this was very surprising to me also from the consultations that we had. So this was a clear feedback also from the respondents to the consultation. Yeah, and last but not least, just to also some advertisement, we have next week a workshop in Brussels where we will, on the one hand, in the morning present sort of more the current activities, what we have done in the market monitoring report, so very positive developments regarding the development of gas markets there, but in the afternoon we will have this presentation officially of this ACER-CR joint conclusions paper where we more in detail will present sort of the main lessons that we draw from these consultations and sort of the regulatory framework for the future. So thank you very much, and I'm also happy to discuss later.
Many thanks, Markus. So, are there any questions for Markus? The lady over there, yes?
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. I think that the point about planning infrastructure is very good, but I wonder if you plan some kind of guarantees for development of infrastructure, because, for example, in Netherlands, we know that with changing of closing Groningen, it lead to different problems for generation company and so on. And I wonder, would it be some guarantees for changing the plan of infrastructure?
Yes, I think it could be more a question for Anne afterwards, but if Markus would like to start giving possible answer.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I really understand what you mean with guarantees, but what I wanted to say also is that we want really a clear, a clear case for new investments first. So, and that's very much in very many cases market-based. So in the market-based cases, we would want to see bookings at least covering a substantial part of this new infrastructure. So I don't think we would. Okay, then there are cases for security of supply, but I think on a market-based basis, we would want to see bookings so that commitment is there for the actual use of the infrastructure then in the future. But I don't know if this is the point you mentioned with guarantees. No?
Okay. Right, so no more questions on... Oh yes, Laurent, please.
Yeah. One point on tariff, and I rebound on the very relevant point that Markus raised. And one question for me, the most relevant tariff distortion is on the demand side. We're always speaking about supply side, we're never speaking about demand side. And we need to make clear view on forward view for end users when they invest in an appliance, in a heat pump, in an electric vehicle, in whatever, to see what is the costs that are driven by this new investment that should be transparent for end users and reflected in their tariff.
No, that's a very good point, and that's mainly on the electricity side, a topic I would say. And here, at least in Austria, we have gone the way to say, yes, there should be a stronger or more of the tariff element put on the capacity payment. So that's clearly for the future, even if you want to have some incentives, yeah, to use also maybe to have a lower capacity, but this is of course the direction. Yeah, I think you can increase the capacity portion of the tariff and reduce the commodity part. Yeah.
Very good question. And no? Okay, great. So we've seen so far Christoph in his study outlining the different regulatory barriers to sector coupling, and we understood from Markus the good work of the regulators actually addressing some of them and receiving same feedback. So now we will move to the infrastructure possible barriers to sector coupling. And we have Anne Borsma, who is working for ENSOC, and he's the director of the system development. So please, Anne.